Discounted payback is a lot like traditional payback, except now we're dealing with discounted cash flows. And so the discounted payback period is how long does it take for the discounted expected cash flows produced by a project to offset the investment? How long does it take for you to get your money back? But instead of just dealing with kind of straight up cash flows, you're dealing with discounted, which is the present value of a cash flow. And if the present value of what comes back to a project never is enough to offset the investment, then the discounted payback period is infinity. What's the rule? You accept investments in project if their discounted payback period is less than or equal to the limit. So again, the managers say we want projects that pay back, just have a discounted payback period of this amount or less. Quicker money is better. If it takes too long, that's bad. Project gets rejected. So we're going to focus on conventional cash flows. Again, remember a conventional cash flow, you start out with a negative cash flow, and then after that, everything is positive or negative, and it suits itself quite nicely to discounted payback or payback because what happens at time zero, you put out your money, you're out there, you know what you need to recover, and then after that, everything that happens is either zero, you're not getting any closer, or positive, you're getting money, so you are getting closer. There's never any negatives, nothing's ever flipping signs. You're not dealing with a situation where it's a bunch of positives, then a bunch of negatives. Positives mean you get money, then you pay it out. It makes, it doesn't flip flop. You can work with discounted payback with those, but require modification. But we're looking at straight up conventional cash flows where you put out money, and then after that, money comes back to you. Or it's zero, you have at least one positive, but you never have any more negatives. Nothing else is ever going out. So once time zero hits, you know what your target is. And again, discounted expected cash flow, DCF, is present value of a cash flow, expected cash flow. So there's an internal inconsistency in discounted payback. So when we're getting the present value of a cash flow, we treat it all as taking place at the end of the period, so then we can discount it the way we discount everything in this class. So, you expect some cash over the first year. What is it? What's its present value? Divide by 1 plus r. If it's expected in the second year, 1 plus r over 2. Now, once we have the discounted cash flow, once we have that present value, that's what goes in our machine. That's what goes into our machine that gets spit out uniformly throughout the year. So, let's say, you expect $300 in year 2. So $300 in year 2, and suppose the discount rate's 10%. So that's the discounted cash flow, would be 300 divided by 1.1 squares. That's the discounted cash flow expected in year 2. That is what goes into the machine here, and every day, divide that by 365. That's how much we get spit out. So it's a little bit of an internal inconsistency where for discounting purposes, we treat everything as if it happens at the end, but then once we have our discounted cash flow, we assume that gets spread out, produced uniformly throughout the year. So we have essentially the same 5 steps with discounted payback as we did with regular payback. The first step, figure out, the investment. It's just, C0 is going to be negative, so it's the opposite of C0. At the beginning of the project, you have to lay out $100. So cash flow times 0 is negative 100. So C0 equals negative 100. So the opposite of C0 is 100, and that's how much needs to be recovered. Step 2. You want to find out the discounted expected cash flow needed after 1 year to reach discounted payback. And so again, suppose, in year 1 you lay out 100. Suppose in year 2 you expect, or I'm sorry, year 0 you lay out negative 100, so that's your cash flow. So you need 100. Year 1 you expect 50. So how much do you need after 1 year? 100 minus, and let's say the cost of capital is 10%. It's 100 minus 50 over 1.10. You got to remember to take the present value, and that's how much you need after 1 year. Now again, if that's zero, what that means, let's get a pen. What that means is suppose I'm going to change the numbers a little bit. Suppose you need 100, and suppose the discount rate is 10%, and suppose in the first year that's the cost of capital, and suppose in the first year you expect 110. Well, that's equal to 0, and discounted payback would be exactly 1 year. And then you just decide whether or not to invest. Suppose you expected 100 minus, let's say, 220 over 1.10. That's equal to negative 100. What that means is you put in 100. Year one, you expect $220. Well, $220 has a present value of 200. So you put in 100. In the first year, you're expecting to get back a present value, discounted cash flows of 200. So therefore, 1 year from now, you're 100 over. Time 0, you need 100. Time 1, you're 100 over. You know that payback happens sometime between time 0 and time 1. Finally, what if we have a situation where we put in 100, so we need 100. In year 1, we expect $55, discounted by 10%, and that's equal to $50. So the present value of 55 at 10% is equal to 50. So you need 100 because you invested 100. You expect cash flows of 55, which have a present value of 50, again, when the R is equal to 10%. And so as a result, after 1 year, you're still $50 short. So what do? You go to, you can't see it, but that's what we just laid out. You continue to do that. So you say, okay, after 2 years, and if payback turns out, discounted payback turns out to be exactly 2 years, you can make your decision. If it turns out that after 2 years that you have gotten back more in discounted cash flows than you needed, then after 1 year you needed money. So after 1 year you needed money, after 2 years you had more than enough, then you know that discounted payback is somewhere between 1 and 2, and we'll talk about how to do that in a second. If after 2 years you still need money, then you would say, okay, well, what about 3 years, 4 years, and you keep doing it until you either find when you had payback or when that you're never going to get payback. So what if we have a case where we go into 1 year and we need money, and then we have some expected cash flow that we divide by 1 plus r to the t to get the discounted cash flow. And if we got all of that, we'd have more than enough so that discounted payback happens somewhere between the beginning of the year, which is at time t minus 1, and then the end of the year, which is at time t, or time t and time t plus 1. But basically, at the beginning of the year you needed money, or the end of the previous year you needed money, and then at the end of this year you had more than enough, so payback happened sometime in the middle of the year. How do we figure out exactly when it happened? Well, again, that's all set out here. Oops, that's all set out here, and I'll just leave it up for a second, and if you want to look at it, you can freeze this. But basically, so at the beginning, you still need money, you still need discounted cash. At the end, you have more than needed. So you know that somewhere here, you got just enough to achieve discounted payback. And how much was it? Well, again, remember, what are we going to put into our machine? Well, we'll put into our machine all of the discounted cash flow that we expect during that year. So what do we expect during that year? All over 1 plus r to the t. So even though, we're dealing with a year, which is a period of time, we're going to discount it from this point here. And that's our discounted cash flow, and that's what goes into the machine. And then the machine spits it out evenly, and we want to know how far into the year it is until we get, the amount that we need. And once we have enough to achieve payback, that's where, or discounted payback, that's where discounted payback occurs. And so what it is the DCF needed in year over the DCF expected in year. And again, expected in year is the bottom, which is the total. And then the top part is how much we need to get to hit discounted payback. And that fraction is how far into the year it takes before we achieve payback. And again, this is for the year where you go into the year needing money, and then by the end of the year, you have more than enough. If you need money here and you still need money here, then payback hasn't happened and you got to look to the next year. And step 5, you make your decision. How does my discounted payback period compare to the threshold, to the limit? If it's less than or equal, I accept because I get my money fast enough. If it takes me too long to get my money, such that either I have an infinite discounted payback period, I never get my money back on a discounted basis, or it takes a finite period but it's longer than the threshold, then I reject.